the way what I thought, in previously I talked about a lot of my partners where I worked with them. We developed strategy for them. So in like last 3 years, I worked with several partners worldwide, like some big, some small, some very small, some super big. And we really help them to understand what they really want to do, because somebody say, hey, I really want to use Hadoop, and they really don't really understand what Hadoop can do, but they really want to use Hadoop. And there is a really very funny story I have. I won't tell what the company was. So me and a few of my team members, we went, it's a really like billion-dollar company, like maybe a couple billion, okay. So we were sitting and talking about what Hadoop can do and what kind of data sets they had, all that thing. And now the CTO for that company comes and he says, sorry guys, I'm late. He sits down in the room, we start talking 10-15 more minutes, and we talk about Hadoop, and finally the CTO speaks out. He says, so where this Hadoop headquarter is, So, and everybody, as being consultant, and they're gonna write the check for us. I thought it's not better us to decide to answer his question. Let his people decide. Let him answer this question. Where the Hadoop headquarter is, because his understanding was that Hadoop is a company. And we're gonna be deploying Hadoop here. So but the good thing is that they really don't know what Hadoop is, all that thing, but they really knew about it. They really wanted to use this. It's a really very big company. And it was, it sounds funny in some perspective, but it actually gives, it gave us really very good. And then by the time we finished our talk, and he said, okay, so when you guys gonna start working on that? Let's build this thing, So that's where, so even if you look into enterprises, Hadoop is still new. So many person still think that, okay, it's really very good thing. I have 10 gig data. Can I process through Hadoop? And the good thing is you really don't need to Hadoop to process a 10 gig data, because there are several other very easy solutions available. So the question here is that how you really come to the conclusion that Hadoop is a choice for you. So the way, based on all that experience what I had, I really consider this whole scenario as a 4 pieces of puzzle. You think this whole strategy as a puzzle, and you solve each puzzle, and then when you have all 4 pieces of this puzzle, you really come to a conclusion that whether Hadoop is a choice for you or Hadoop is not a choice for you. Okay, because it's really not for everybody. So first piece is determining the actual requirement, because that's going to really give you that what is next here. Second is choosing the cluster. If you think that Hadoop is that, then we really look into that, okay, what's the cluster type and what Hadoop distribution you're really going to choose. That's a 10 node cluster, 100 node cluster, 1000 node cluster, or 20 node cluster, okay. Whether you're going to be using Cloudera, you're going to be using MapR, you're going to be using Hortonworks, or you're going to cook your own through Apache, something like that. And once you have that, then you really need to look into that how you are going to process the data, how you are really going to analyze the data which is processed. If the pre-processing is really needed, and finally, are you going to write your own visualization, or you just want to buy third-party visualization? So most of the time, companies using that, where they really look for third-party vendors. I put it like whether you want to do, how you want to do it, and finally, because everything is there, based on my experience and based on the way Cloudera, Hortonworks, these guys are, it's an open source software, but these guys are making tons of money. How they are making money? They are making money through services. And if there is a product which needs lots of services, it means it really needs a lots of help. It's not like you can download and you can build a 10 node cluster. Based on my experience, 90% of Hadoop clusters are underutilized, because they were just put together something, and the idea was that, okay, let's use this, we're going to be using Hadoop, but it's open source, it's like put together to run something really very nicely, but in order to get the full ROI, you really need to go through. So the fourth piece is running Hadoop clusters successfully. That is very important piece, because how to make it error-free, how to get everything out from it, how to squeeze everything out from it. So very first thing is that, okay, consideration. Very first piece of puzzle here is that how we are really looking into the data size. So is the data large enough to process through Hadoop? As I mentioned, that big data, the big is very subjective. For me, big is very different versus for you, what you really think. So the question comes, is the size of data large enough to process through Hadoop? And now again it comes, because if you think about, you can create a Hadoop cluster, okay, which can be a 3-node cluster, and it has a 1 terabyte on each node. Now you have a 3 terabyte disk space. Now if you think about the replication factor, which is like 256 meg, which is like every gig, you are replicating 3 times, so it means that you are taking 30% out of it. Now you have in 3 terabyte, you are actually having a 2 terabyte real space on it. So if you are using Hadoop just to store your data, which is, as I mentioned very early in my discussion, to store data in Hadoop is cost like 10 cents per gig, versus store data in RDBMS cost about $1 a gig. So that way you can dump data in Hadoop. Very good way to look into. You have a very cheap cluster where you can drop the data, you can store now, think later, process later, objective. So data large enough, you can start thinking like that way. If you have a data of a few gig, it might not be very useful to have a Hadoop cluster. Again, you can go with gigs, because in some companies they really have a 300 gig, 500 gig data, but they really want to use the power of MapReduce to do very fast processing and remove the reiterative processing. Like as I mentioned earlier, the concept of data lake. You might now have a lots of data, but you really you want to use the power of Hadoop to remove the other processing engine, which is coming out from other. So for example, if you are using Excel, you can actually load a really fairly significant size of file, depending on how big your memory is in your machine. So operating system does provide capabilities to load it, but why you are choosing Hadoop rather than any other engine? Because you really want to invest in data storage, and second, you really want to invest in data processing engine. And MapReduce is proving to be a very important, very strong, very sturdy, and as well as really very fast engine if you add more resources to it. And it's a distributed. So really want you, rather than going to a cluster, rather than going to an individual machine base, you really want to go cluster base. That's why you really want to choose it. Okay, and then what is the aggregate size of data? So like what kind of data you are generating on regular basis, and what is your aggregated data? Because if you are generating data, you depend on how you really want to process with that data. You might have a batch processing which consolidate that data and just filter it out, but you just want to keep it everything. So that's things, because you might be, if you have some machine which generate 10 gigs, 10 megabytes of data on hourly basis, you can calculate. So those factors, those a tally, there is a report book which is really needed to understand all that aggregation, all that thing, what you really have here. And next it comes that, are you moving from traditional data storage processing to Hadoop, or starting anew? It means you already have something which is working fine, but just is not meeting your requirement depending on your new business is coming, new business requirement. So you just want to move from traditional to Hadoop, or you are actually thinking it's a brand new startup, you really want to collect, you want to hook with worldwide web, or you really have access to certain logs, you have access to certain data, or maybe, for example, you have access to supply chain management, you really want to tap into and you really want to process it. So new versus existing, and what ability and capacity you have to manage the data as it grows. Because you can create a Hadoop cluster, but if your data is growing fast, do you have enough capability, IT, resources, cost, that you can add more machine, you can add resources on demand. So once you have, so this is like the questions about the data size. How really data? The answer for these questions is really goes to, based on these answers from these questions, we can jump to next stage. But by the end of these questions, if you ask, and if you say that in all scenarios, their answers could be different. Like as I mentioned, that somebody might say, I have 100 gig data, I have a 10 terabyte data, and I'm doing very good with my RDBMS, and I'm really okay, and it's okay with them. Versus somebody having 300 gig data but wants to use MapReduce might go with Hadoop. So based on this data, based on the learnings, based on if you are working with some enterprise consultant who is really helping you, you can come up to the conclusion that, okay, I really would like to have Hadoop as a platform of choice based on these factors. And once you have it, we will look into in same perspective that what is the data storage locations, and that's really very important. If you are moving from traditional BI, traditional RDBMS, It means your data is sitting in RDBMS and you're gonna move it. If your data was flat file, it was just stored in your NAS, where you have a 100 terabyte NAS, or you might have an object stored where you are dumping data, or you might be storing a lots of data in your Amazon S3 bucket. Now you are paying almost 300, 400, 3,000 to 5,000 to 30,000 to maybe 50,000 just to storage cost, because it costs like about 9 to 10 cents per gig per month in Amazon S3 bucket. Like average Google Drive, or depend on, and if you are storing more data, the price can go lower. So what you are really paying? So where the data is stored, or you don't even have a data, you're gonna build the cluster and you're gonna tap into the data. You build your cluster, everything is connected, now your data start doing it. So where the data really stores, okay. And based on where the data is stored, that will help you to go next level. Because if you think about, you have data stored in your on-premise NAS store. You just collected lots of data, you really want to use it. The best option is, if you have terabytes of data sitting in NAS, it's really good to have a Hadoop cluster running on-premise. Otherwise, you really need to move this 10 or 20 or 100 terabytes of data to somewhere in cloud if you try to choose a cloud-based solution. If you are not using that, if you are in on-premise, what you really do, that we will learn in next. But if you are choosing in cloud, which cloud is best for you? Are you really going to use Amazon EC2, where you are running Hadoop cluster on an Amazon machines? You can choose Rackspace, software, you can choose Azure, or you can use Google Compute. The only thing is, rather than having machine physically in your control, you are using these machines to run it. That's one way. Next, you can say, I'm really not in mood to have these machines managed. I really want to do something called where I will use Hadoop on demand. And that also called Amazon EMR. It's called Elastic MapReduce. The idea of Elastic MapReduce is that use Hadoop as a go. Hadoop, when you want to use it, you spin new cluster, hook with your data, process your data, collect your results, discard your cluster. It's just, we will learn more about Amazon EMR later. And when you really, so based on your data size and data location, you can come up with a solution that, oh, what is the best? If your data stored was in Amazon, it's better to use either EC2 or it's better to use Amazon EMR. If your data was already in on-premise, it's better to use on-premise solution, unless you have capability to move that terabytes of data in cloud if you want to do it. Security concern, whether you really want to give that data in cloud and you feel very well that, oh, my data is in cloud, but I'm not losing my night's sleep. That's where you can think of. And based on all that thing, you will be able to at least guide yourself that, okay, based on my thing, actually it's the best option for me to run an on-premise cluster, because all my data is here. I have enough money to have a guy who can who can take care of that. I also have enough money to pay a Hadoop architect who can really come and do all that thing for me. Or if not, then I can hire companies like Cloudera, Hortonworks to send their consultant on $3,000 to $5,000 yearly subscription, and they will come and take care of me. So now you got idea of that based on these two factors, that where you would like to have this, where you really want to store this data. The next thing comes that, okay, data types and data processing. Because we figured out where the data should be, we figured out that, okay, what the size could be. Now is the what kind of this data is. Is it like images? Like as I gave an example of, you have a source, you are working in GIS, the only thing you have are lots of coordinates and lots of pictures. Okay, so how is that your thing, or you are a company who is running mid-market solutions like supply chain management, or where you are really collecting this data and you really need to process, just like, or it's an event stream, it could be log, what kind of data it is. Okay, once you have that in your mind, then you can think of, okay, because if you are storing in Hadoop, we have already made decision what kind of file format we should use. Whether we should be using RC file, Podcat, sequence, Avro, text, what compression we're going to be using it based on, and there are so many ways we can look into. And then the last point is, because as I mentioned that in Hadoop, you process data, you store data back in Hadoop. Are there any limitation? Because I will tell you a company example. This company, they are like live bidding. And it's a company, what it does, it just do live bidding for the ads in your mobile app. So when you are running a free mobile app or ad supported app, you might see there is a like top or bottom somewhere you see these ads. And there are hundreds of companies. Like 2 weeks back, I was in a game developer conference in San Francisco. There was a booth, like almost 40% of companies were like how to monetize your app. Like every booth you see that there is everybody, because that's a big money. It's if you think about that, everybody think like Apple, these guys make like $1 billion just in apps. So how they are really making that money? It's a really big market there. There are China, it's like every other company in China is really trying to do that game monetization. They have forced to do it. So the thing is that you say that you build an application and you really want to promote it. So you say that, okay, I got only $100, I really want to monetize my app. And because my app is, for example, just take example, your app is related with a mathematics game, okay, which is like some mathematical formula you really want to do. So you really want to promote that ad in those apps where something related with mathematics and analytics is really there. So if somebody is using, so that's where you really, so you bid that I have $100 and I'm gonna pay 0.001 cents on every ad which is gonna show up. Now you push that ad, but there is some other guy who has similar app and he say that my budget is $200 for my advertising, and then I will give 0.003 cents for every visible ad. Now, so these guys are competing for the space in that ad. So there are these mobile market companies, they come and they really, it's like dog fight going on there. So these companies, they collect like 100,000, 500,000 requests coming, they really need to see who is there, and then these ads has to be processed. So all ads has to be processed within like 15 to 20 minutes of time. So you can really put that ad back into the game, because somebody is playing game now, by the time you process, the game is gone, the guy is gone, you can really put ads. It's a really very cutthroat game is going on underneath. So what you really see that, so how you can use Hadoop and MapReduce? It means if you are processing the data which you have collected in last 1 hour, you have only 15-minute window to process that data, get the results out, so you can really propose the ads for these things. If you can't do in 15 minutes, you lost business. So there is a limitation with that. So how you can do? So somebody will say, oh, this is my requirement. Can you tell me if every 30 minutes, if I get 100 gig data, and I really need to process that 100 gig in 15 minutes so I can give the result of this job to next job so that I can have my bid platform working. You really need to build a cluster which can do that job in every 15 minutes, and not only that, it can handle the fluctuation in data. It is very much possible that sometimes, by any reason, every person on this planet want to play that exact same game. You need to think about it. So can it expand in that way, or a 30% expand? So you really think about those things. So are there any processing times required for your application? Once you think all those things, that will help you to decide the size of the cluster, where it has to be stored. Because if you are using a web-based service to store the data, and then you are using an on-premise machine to process the data, it might take about 10 minutes to download the data. You might have a very amazing processing capability in your cluster, but the network pipe between that where you are storing the data and where you are processing the data may be a T1 pipe. It might take some time. It's not a fiber. So you might really have a latency. So those things, once you consider, the next step comes that, okay, what kind of Hadoop cluster you are going to use. Okay, so here is consideration about using a Hadoop cluster. Based on 3 slides, we talk about like our first piece of the puzzle. That is it on-premise, or is going to be cloud, or is going to be third-party hosting sites like you are hosting either on Amazon or Google or anywhere else. Okay, when you are choosing Hadoop cluster, the key questions to ask here are, do you have IT to manage the cluster? You say, no, I really don't have anything. These two are gone. I'm a single man army, I know everything about it, but I really don't, I can't be 3 person. Okay, but if you have, do we still have a significant small team, but you can really take care of that job, So it means that you can go rather than having on-premise, because on-premise you need to have machine. But if you have one extra person, two extra person, you can actually say, okay, I'm gonna go to Amazon EC2 where I'm gonna build my own cluster, but I'm gonna be using machines rather than I'm gonna be using EMR or something like that. Or I can use Windows Azure, I can go Google Compute, because at least I have a person who can keep running my cluster. I don't need to worry about electricity, I don't need to worry about up and down, all that thing, because Amazon or these cloud vendors are really taking care of my thing. I'm just gonna pay hourly fee for them. Okay, and what if you want to utilize existing infrastructure? Maybe you are a company where you already have 100 machines in your disposal and you really want to use them. Then if you have those machines, but do you have IT, you have a guy who can really put together a Hadoop cluster for you? Or if you could do it, can somebody manage it? So these questions are really very important to get answered, and once you have the answer, you can really you can choose one or two choice in between you have. Okay. So once you decide that, we will talk a little more about EMR a little later. There is a dedicated slides for that. So, but for example, you choose one of these available options now. Now the next thing is that consideration of using Hadoop distribution. If you want to build Hadoop distribution like now today, if you decide you have a two machines, you can download the Cloudera, you can download from Hortonworks, you can download Map or Pivotal. Within 2 hours, depending on how good you are in networking. Like if there is no technical issue, you end up, you might have a cluster running in an hour. Okay, so it means these technology is really very good. These companies did amazing job. That's why they have millions of dollars in their pocket through VC, because they made this whole thing is really dumbed down to run very easy for you. The complexity is how to make it run smoothly. That's where the money comes for everybody. Okay, so once you have, so these are the choices you have. You can build your own Hadoop. It's an open source. Download bits from, okay, there is already packaged bits available. And I had an idea to really go through and do all that thing, but because of the workshop model, the way we decided not to do workshop, because we don't even have power plugs for everybody. So the idea was just have. So otherwise, I could have shown that it takes like 10 minutes to build your own Hadoop cluster by your own. Just download quick. There are few things if you can take care. I could run two node cluster just building my own Hadoop in 10 to 15 minutes. You can choose options. And what about cloud based? You don't want to touch machines. You just want to really use the cloud. You can build your own. You can choose EMR, Hadoop on Azure, and Google Compute, EC2. You can choose anything. So we talk a lot about EMR. So what is EMR stands for Elastic MapReduce. An Elastic MapReduce is like on-demand MapReduce, where you really don't own the machine, but you own. I will tell you at the last what it is. So it's available within 15 to 20 minutes of configuration, no hardware, So you think is that you have data. You really say that I really want to process this data through Hadoop. You go to Amazon, which is available in Amazon Web Services. You say that I really give me a 3-node cluster. Each node must have 8-core CPU, total 8 cores CPU, and it should have 64 gig RAM. Now you got a 3-node cluster which has 24 combined core, and you have about 192 gig RAM available for you. And now you are running. Now you hook that with your data source, which is possibly is Amazon S3 bucket. What's going to happen? That cluster will take about 15 to 20 minutes for ready. Amazon is going to underneath create a 3-node cluster for you, just a hot cluster. Is going to pull your data, because in order to process the data, it has to be on HDFS. So data has to move from your source location to HDFS. And if you are on Amazon S3, Amazon provide a really very fast pipe between S3 and compute or EMR cluster. Like they can move 500 gig in minute. That's fast it is. So if you have a couple terabyte, it might take 5-10 minutes to move the data. Now you have data in HDFS. Now you run MapReduce jobs on it. You can provide you write your Java code, which is in MapReduce. You know what kind of data it is. You load your Java code. You say run it. Now it's gonna run it. All the results is gonna be collected, and results gonna move from EMR machines back to your S3 bucket. And once everything is done, cluster is dissolved based on your machine configuration. You really pay a few pennies. So I don't know if you guys know, like when EMR really being built in 2010 time frame, there is a story goes that it's a very big newspaper in East Coast. They had this model where they were using a really big infrastructure, so they collect information, stories, whole day, whole week. and then around like 4 to 5 p.m. they start this processing where they process that whole data, and they were using even Hadoop to do that thing. So they had their own Hadoop running like about 20 node cluster, and they were processing all that data from 5 to 6 p.m. And by the time it's 10 p.m., 11 p.m., now they have results available. So they use that results to move to print the newspaper. And that newspaper by 1 a.m. is available for everybody. So running that cost was about $1 million monthly to all that thing. So it's like $1 million was an operating cost to have that infrastructure running. Amazon was working with, Amazon decided that, hey, why don't you guys try EMR? And let's try exact same thing. The data was sitting in case early it was on premise. Now what they did, they moved about a week long data, which is like so when they're storing data locally, they move all that data in S3 bucket. So keep having a copy of S3 bucket, so they collect about 1 week, 2 week data, because most of the newspaper stories are about a week long, maybe something today, something based on the history, some event happened 2 days back. So you can sum up like 90% of the information in a newspaper is about recent to 1 week. Now that company decided to use EMR to process the data. And because that time it was taking about 35 to 40 minutes to build a cluster, because it's about 4 years back. They, rather than using evening, they started building the cluster about 4 p.m. And by the time about 10 p.m., 11 p.m., they had this cluster ready, just like about average 7 hours of processing. So they do 7 hours of processing, same 20 node cluster, they had exact same thing, and you wouldn't believe that their everyday cost was $24. They were building whole newspaper on $24 per day, while the running cost for the cluster is 24 multiplied by 30 or 31. Now you have about $1,000. So it was a running cost for building that thing was $1,000, while the infrastructure they had this whole team to build all that thing was about $1 million. But there are lots of things, because the MapReduce jobs, you still need guys who can write MapReduce code, so still we haven't included that cost in in this $1,000. But you end up salary, you still think that you have a 2-3 engineer whom you are paying a lot. You end up having $100,000 running cost by same thing what you were doing with $1 million. If you collect all that things, So this is the savings, startups, they love this model. They have data, they really have a few $1,000s in their pocket, they really don't need to go VC. The company called Vidi, they are like a kind of Twitter where you can, I don't know what they are doing now, but we were working with them at one time. So they created this concept where you can have a 20-second, a 15-second video, maybe 10-second, you take it and you share with others. It's pretty much same as Twitter, the only difference is a 10 or 20-second video, I don't remember what size. The guys really had no money, and they really wanted to do something. So they came up with this idea using cloud, etc. They just had running overhead like $500, $800 per month. They really didn't need any seed funding, couple $100,000 to do it. They just built it, and by the time they really needed, they got lots of money. So we worked with them. So that's why EMR is very powerful. The only thing, at the last, I would say that EMR has capability, so when you build an on-demand cluster, at the last you can say, when my job is done, move my data back to my source and dissolve the cluster. Now you have capability, you said don't dissolve it. Keep it running, because you keep running jobs every 30 minutes, so that's your requirement. So you can have an EMR which is running exact as on EC2, because the machines which EMR is really using are EC2 compute. They are same machines what is really used in EC2 compute. So without even building your own Hadoop cluster, you spawn the EMR but keep it running forever. It might cost you, but you have a Hadoop cluster running is like 10 to 15 minutes. So that's one way you can look into. So once we jump in that level, now the next piece of puzzle is the choosing the data processing app. Data processing is like by first and second piece of puzzle, we build the cluster, we have the ability to store our data now. Now the next thing is that how we are choosing the data processing app. As I mentioned that you have data, but because being MapReduce as an engine, you really need some smart guy who can write MapReduce code for you. If you cannot hire that person for any specific reason, you can buy a software which can do MapReduce jobs for you. So there are several companies, you can talk about DataMate, Kermasphere, Good Data, all these companies, they have, Platforma, they will do that job for you. They will charge some money for you, but you give them, you hook your data source with them, and they will do all that job for you. So do you have in-house talent? Okay, because the question comes very first when you store data in HDFS or Hadoop, who is going to process that data? Because now, okay, unless you are using Hive. So for example, you say, okay, I store the data, and I know a lot of SQL. I'm damn smart in SQL. I can really do very good job. Then you can say, okay, I'm going to use either Hive, or I'm going to use Cloudera and Impala, or I will use a few other existing technology which can make my data look like a table, and then I can do SQL jobs with it. So you really he didn't pay any money to anybody else, but now you have the ability to read that data through Hive or Impala, and you can actually process. Now you see, that's safe, but you can say, oh, that tools might be slow, it might take long amount of time. That's where you can say, oh, maybe the tables are not good. I would like to process my data because data is very unstructured. I don't even know what's going on. Then you can use something called Pig. Pig is another piece of Hadoop ecosystem where it doesn't create table as a table like in Hive table where you can make a SQL call, but you can make something similar call like that, and you can process the data. So Pig is mostly used for log processing because you can write, you can still Hive especially for SQL where you can make a SQL, almost SQL statement. You can say select star from table, and your file, Hive is going to look your file as a table. Versus Pig, you can say load data schema as, where you say that the data is actually a CSV, TSV, or this kind of file, and the schema is look like it's a comma separated value or maybe something like that. So you are telling Pig to, hey, this is what it look like, so like log, syslogs. They all know that what is IP address, first field is IP address, second field is timestamp. You really know all those things. So you can tell Pig, hey, this is my kind of data, and then you can use Pig to process that data. Okay, if you do not have it, if you understand your data very well, you can really take care of processing by these things. And if you not, then you can look into a third-party vendor who can do MapReduce job, and then you can run a proof of concept code. That's why I said that what is your timeline to try and accept a POC? Because when you take a third-party vendor, based on my experience, it takes about 2 to 3 months to adopt, understand, because these applications are big. They really need time to adjust with your data because they do a lots of work, dirty work for you. But once established, then you are really very good, golden. So do you have all that ability to go through and you can take it? If you go through with POC, where you are trying to take a vendor outside who is going to help you, are you going to choose third-party vendor? And if yes, now the security comes in picture. That do you really, because sometimes you might say, oh, I really don't want this particular applications to connect with outside world. Some applications might say, oh, most of our logics are in cloud. You need to go back to do the computation. You say, no, it's not really accessible for us. Is it a full service application? Because you might end up buying 3 products to do 3 different kind of job. One is gonna clean your data, second is gonna process your data, third is gonna visualize your data. Or you need a one company which can do all 3. So that's why if you remember very first talk when I gave very first one, there are hundreds of companies. Some company do a full service. That's why I mentioned that what if a full service application is already available? Very few companies really do full service because you really need a tons of money to build an application like that. But once you build it, you are golden. Companies gonna keep putting money behind you. So certain companies, they can say, hey, we are very good in visualization, like Zoom data. They say we can clean your data, we can do a lot for you, but we are a visualization company. You have your data, we can take help from MapReduce to process your data, but we are more in visualization, tabular. They say we can hook back to you. We can take the Cloudera Impala table and we can connect with the table and then we can visualize the data. So there are so many ways. When you look into the layers in between, you might have a 2 or 3 applications connected with each other, and the output of one application is input to other, and by the time you have whole your pipeline established. And depending on pipeline, you know that more the components, more points of failure. If one application fails, your whole pipeline is really clogged there. So once you have, that's why choosing a full service application is always a good choice. And any limitation with result processing such as time limit, I again say, when you are using multiple applications, are you comfortable with how fast they are really processing and how soon you can pick up the results from others? So once you got the answers for that, you can make a you can make better decision how you really would like to go further. Now once we arrive there, we decided that we're going to be using a third-party vendor or somebody like us, somebody who really can give all the bells and whistles in their application which are required for you. Now you really go and look for BI vendor, because now some BI vendor will not able to process your data. They will take your processed data and give you intelligence about it. Some BI vendor will process your data and give you visualization. So something called full service BI. So the companies like Platform where I worked before, we were business in full service BI. You give us garbage data, garbage in a sense is really dirty, you don't even know. Platform will take from A to Z, and I'm not like, I would say proposing for anybody, but because that's what application does, and that's why I'm really mentioning. If you would like, you can take a look about their application. There are a few other companies who are doing full service BI, and sometimes if you look into the Omnature is a full service BI application. Now they have connected with so Omnature, you can use a clipstream data. There are hundreds of companies who collect. They have website where they get 1 million to 100 million user on monthly basis. Now they really want to understand the user experience. They really want to say, okay, how to monetize these users are coming to us. You can use Omnature product, which is from Adobe or like of their partners, and they can really tell you that, oh, based on 100 million or 1 billion or 1 million users coming to your website, actually these 100,000s are something you can follow up for monetization, something like that. So full service BI, can you do in Hadoop? Can you take the data from Hadoop and use exact same thing like Omnature, and you can do self-service BI. Once you are there, you can look into the limitation based on your relationship with a BI vendor, that access security, because that's always a concern. Okay. Sometimes you can have 2 or 3 vendors, like when you were doing POC, you might see that there are data here, there is Platform, there is Karma Sphere, there is Pivotal, and then what's called Pentaho. These are hundreds of companies, they really want to tell we are doing good, we are doing. Some company have really visualization which is gonna blow you away, but their processing engine is really very slow. By the time they will blow you away from with their visualization. Other company already processed everything and already gave you results back. They might not looking very good, but you have the results. So you will choose all those things, okay. And then financial and technical limitation choosing vendor, because somebody is very costly but you like it, but you can pay for them. Somebody you can afford them, but they really cannot help you totally. So once you have answer to these questions, at least you are in position that, okay, I have my cluster, I have my data types, data store, all that thing ready. I choose which Hadoop cluster I'm gonna be used. I choose where I'm gonna be running this whole thing. And now finally I actually choose a vendor who is going to help me to do my data processing. Once you have all that thing ready, here is just as I mentioned that having a BI vendor is really very important, and most of the vendors rather than, because there is a lots of application development, is a new technology, so most of the vendors rather than paying upfront cost, most of the vendor would like to go service based fees, yearly fees. You pay you pay yearly, and then there is some like supplemental cost as a run, because that's where because they are evolving, so they want you to be with them so they can evolve as the industry is really evolving, as the new algorithms, new technology. So most of the vendors gonna end up having that kind of model. Are you comfortable with? Because sometimes you say, I spent 50 grand, I got the software, now it's my own, you go your way, I'm gonna take care of my that. But here all this new age BI, most of these relationships are really very long. You are actually committing for 2-3 years, because the cost is associated in a way. If you take 1 year is 100,000, but if you take 3 years at 150,000. So if you take a vendor, you really gonna be living, living with them at least next 3 years. So you really need to make sure that this is what you really, the person whom you are really inviting to work next 2-3 years, are you comfortable with it? That's why as I mentioned, the POCs are very longer, because 2-3 months, because by the time both parties can see each other and say that we are in good terms, there is no some fishy things going on underneath. So once you can choose all those things. related with now the fourth piece, the final piece of our puzzle comes. And what this thing is that how to run Hadoop cluster successfully. As I mentioned, that you had variety of choices. You had EMR, where nothing was there, you just built something in air, not in air, but at least in somewhere. You used it, you disposed it, you got your results, and everybody shake hands and just went their own way. No, nothing really needed. Whatever the performance was, you never cared because you end up paying $20, $30, $50 for that job. Okay. Second, you really put together about a 200,000 investment, and you put together a 10-node cluster. Each machine cost you $10,000. All that bells and whistles. Now, and there is a true guy whom you are paying about $6,000 to $8,000 per month to manage that thing. So, are you really getting the ROI based on that investment? That's the key thing here. So, running Hadoop cluster successfully, because when you are doing MapReduce job, like based on all that discussion, that MapReduce jobs are written by varieties of vendors. Everybody does code differently. Everybody, are they really doing better job? Can they read data? Because it is possible that I can write a code and where I can read like 100 megabyte data as a stream, and I can stream my code to read 10 stream, and I can actually process. I can read. Sorry, if I'm reading 10 megabyte or 100 megabyte, in every stream I can read 1 gig data. I can process fast. Versus somebody who was very novice coder who decided to write MapReduce job, he didn't stream very well. He might say, I'm running only one stream there. How you can understand how many streams you can do based on number of resources you are available? Can you tackle all those things? So if you are using BI vendor who is doing MapReduce job for you, you might see very different results. So for example, if you have a table which has a 100 million row size 1 terabyte, just an example, you are using these third-party vendor, they all give you the results in variation of time. Somebody might process that whole table and give you results in 1 hour, somebody might give you in 45, somebody might take 3 hours to do. That's one way. So it's how they are really doing. Well, because in Hadoop, when you are fine-tuning your cluster, you can do cluster tune on full scale, where everybody is using same configuration, or you can push a job which is tuned for job specific, and it just scale the resources. Somebody say I need, if I have a 64 gig RAM, but I'm going to be using 8 gig for my every task. Somebody would say that I will use 8 gig within the task, but I'm going to be dedicating 2 gig for sorting. Now I have like 25% for sorting because a lot of sorting is going on. Somebody might say, I'm going to be using 200 meg for sorting, because that's the lower limit, because somebody did not configure the parameter correctly. So now your sort heap is only 200 meg. Now when you are doing MapReduce, as I mentioned, it's a key value pair, you are processing a lots of data. You really, at the last, you are shuffling the data, then you are sorting the data, so you can get results correctly. If you have a 2 gig heap, and if you have a 200 meg heap, you know that what's going to happen. The sorting can be done 10 times faster with a larger heap, because that's the maximum limit you can go. So that's where the cloud era, Hortonworks, all these guys makes money, because the product is free. Enterprise consulting is cost, because these guys, they understand, they know what you can fine tune to get the best result. So that's like running a cluster successfully. How you can, this please. How much business rules you can so the good thing is, because MapReduce is a programming or processing framework, it's the guy who is writing the MapReduce code has to include everything. So for example, if I'm writing a very basic MapReduce job and my data has only 2 columns, it has a name and age. My MapReduce code just need to know what is in column 1, which is a name, is a string. It could be 20, it could be 2 characters, so it could be 200 character long. Next field, which is a integer, which is because it is the age where I'm really putting. Now you can apply a lots of logic in it. You, as smart, you really want to apply in this very simple data set I really have. MapReduce will help you to facilitate whatever you want to do with that 2 column. You can write every possible permutation and combination with that could happen.
So if you, that's a very good question. So the way it is that if you are if you are hiring a guy to write MapReduce for you, then the guy is really gonna start from scratch, because you are building this guy to write MapReduce jobs for you. So you can now open your books for them. You can say, this is what I really have, these are the tables I have, this is the data types I have, this is the data we have, and this is how we process. So you bring your analyst who sits down, this developer, and say, hey, when this happened, when the value goes this up, then I do that. When value goes this down, then I do that. You are really doing all those things. This is when you bring a guy who really going to write jobs for you. But if you choose a BI vendor who already has a software which is really doing, the way industry is really, the way it happens, because even you have a data, there is no structure, we call NoSQL, there is no structure, but data always has a schema. Because it's a text file, it has a string, so it has a numbers. They are if I'm writing a code, I know that it's a combination of, if it's an address, it's going to have a numeric and alpha, that's no worry. If I'm processing an image, then it's going to have a binary image, and if I understand how the PNG look like or how the JPEG look like, I understand the encoding, I can really decide for everything with it. So guy really, the person who is really trying to understand the data, he has that knowledge. Business rules are added. That's where come with what kind of, so as I mentioned the example of Omnature. Omnature understands the clickstream data. It knows that clickstream data has that many fields, and in fields that kind of data. It is very much possible that in your company you rearrange the field. The IP address, rather than being the first column, it became the last column. So when you bring Omnature guy to process your data will be read. You just need to help Omnature to understand where the IP address is, but Omnature understand that how IP address is encoded. It's a 3-digit number maximum, dot 3-digit number, so there is octet. So Omnature is going to apply, because when you are using Omnature, it understands it's a clickstream data. So it's going to, if it's not first column is IP address, it's going to apply the IP address logic in every column to figure it out which column has IP address. So it won't even ask for you. But if you rearrange the data, which is not Omnature understand, you apply a logic, then your analyst come and say, hey, this logic where you see 24, this is not the age, this is something else. Once you feed that knowledge, now system understands. So most of these third-party applications, they give you opportunity to, when they load that data and before processing the data, to apply the rules. So you come and data is loaded in front of you, all n amount of rows are loaded in front of you, and then you will say, okay, there are n amount of rows, but because I'm analyst and I really need the information which follow this rule. And rule is just an example. If I take a student database, because I really want all the students from zip code 94404. So I add a new column and I say, hey, list every student where the zip code is equal to 94404. Now one column is added. Every software, every BI vendor will give you ability to that. Now you say, that's really very good, but I really want everybody in that zip code who lives in Foster City Boulevard. Now you added one more column added to it and say, hey, this is because these are business rules. So before I'm processing the data, I'm adding these rules, and I, as being an analyst, I have ability to do. And every software vendor will let you do. And at the same time, you really want to process fast. You have your column, you have your data set which has 100 columns, but you really do not care the income. You don't really care what his father does. So you really say, tick, 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 I really do not need those columns. So now you reduce from 300, 100 to 20 columns where you as an analyst would really interested, versus there is another analyst, his view of that data is very different. He gonna choose 20 different columns which has nothing to do with your column. But you all are working in same data set. Okay. Now these tools is going to process your data. So almost if you use any BI tool just to answer your questions, there will be a chance where your analyst can chime in and add these business rules. And once those rules are done, then you can say that how frequent you really need to run. You can say every hour I need to run this job, every 10 minutes, every one day. So like for example, big companies, they have Hadoop, they schedule these jobs. Night time, they say that all these analysts comes like 9:30, they come 9, but they start by 9:30, taking their coffee, do some cooler talk, come back, say. And by 9:30, hey, your systems is ready, where everybody has data. It's like pretty much EDW model, where you really done. But rather than using EDW, having these consultants who are working between your data space and these maps of data, now you give analysts to access to the full data, where rather than the SQL person or who really helping you to guideline you, you are nobody in between you. You as an analyst, you just go dive into the data and you can say, hey, this is what I'm really looking into. Make sense? Okay. So you see, so now cluster settings, like again, as I mentioned that when you are pushing MapReduce jobs, they are really very different. Everybody will write differently, everybody will set differently then. Okay. Like when we were working, there was a company, where we were processing the email using Hadoop. In regular, but email, the email body is a field. I can write, thanks, I got your email, thanks. That's one message. Or I can write whole novel in that whole email and I can paste something there which is like amazing big. So there is, if you look into the data cardinality, is really, really very different. It could be a 10 character or it could be 100,000 characters in that field. So how you really process those data? It's really very, you have to think all those consideration about data cardinality. That if you might have only 100,000 row in that column, but I might spend 20 hours to process those data because usually very random information is there. So those kinds of things, how you really fine tune the cluster, that's where smartness comes. All these, you really learn how you build the product in a way, that's where we come from. I worked like almost 3.5 years working with really very high-end company where we built like 10 node cluster to 1000 node cluster, 700, 800 node cluster. And we learn what is the best configuration for what kind of data. Because if I'm creating clickstream data where I know what kind of fields are, what could be a maximum field, I can write a very nice MapReduce job to process that data, and I can really process 100 million rows in 1 hour. And if I can give the email data to analyze with clickstream process, it's gonna die within hours because it doesn't even understand. It's just like very different cardinality between data. So running Hadoop cluster is very important. You might end up, you have this thing, that's why it takes longer time to have a POC successful running because they really understand your, yes please. Yes, it's correct. Yeah, that's where we come from. That's what we are building. Yeah, yes, because that's the market need, because that's where we really think that expertise are really very niche. Only few percent, a very small percent of person really know about it. And that's where the money is. Like if you think about that, selling an open source product and having $1 billion in pocket, how you really gonna do it? You really must have a secret sauce in your pocket, which you are really trying to give in pouch. And that's where all these companies are doing. And so that's the key there because everybody can build a 10 node cluster in one hour, 2 hours, depend on. But how successfully you run is the key there. Can you get, because we work, like I would say that even now, 80%, 90% of clusters are misconfigured. They might take, actually they can finish everything in 20 minutes if you properly configure. It might be taking currently 2 hours to finish the job. Your whole pipeline is waiting 2 hours, but technically if you bring a really smart guy to take care of your cluster, give you best possible configuration. Because that's where the key, honestly, if you think about, anybody can guess how many configuration settings available in Hadoop. Anybody can guess. There are 700 configuration available. If you look into, from HDFS to MapReduce. And not only that, you can actually fine tune the cluster on each job. Every job, if within the cluster level, if you say no, I'm not going to accept any custom configuration, my cluster is locked, everybody is going to use my configuration. If you use that like something called super setting, then it's okay because now you really lock your cluster that way. But if you do not lock that cluster, which is very hard to do, because if you do that way, if you have a same cluster running 3 different HR and IT and other companies, you really cannot do that job. So you really say, okay, everybody can choose what their configuration. As I mentioned, each MapReduce job, when each MapReduce task comes with almost like 60 different configuration. If you look into it, just go, if you are interested, just look into hdfs-site.xml, maprad-site.xml. Hadoop core, these HDFS site or like core-site.xml. Just read those configurations. These are like almost like 200,000 lines in their configuration is there. It's designed, that's why it's open source, it's designed for everybody, from 10 node to 10,000. So I think we are almost there. So running Hadoop cluster successfully, as I mentioned, so I already talk about it. Data security is another thing, like whom you really want to give access, and as I mentioned earlier, you have the ability to provide file system based like ADFS and LDAP kind of security. You can apply those kinds of things and they all work. And we still have some, like this is SSH access. There are so many things once you have it, and I will just walk through this quickly if there is something. These slides will be available, like you will be, I was talking with Wasim, and he said that he's going to be sending an email for everybody. He has everybody's email. So these slides will be available for everybody by tomorrow. I will dump tonight in SlideShare. And if you not just, so my username is Avkash Slide. So if you go SlideShare, if you search by my name, you will be getting these slides by tomorrow morning. So I will just, so you can use that way. So all that information I have, and finally, I will just say as a conclusion, no one size fits all. Everybody has a different choice. You might end up, that's why there are varieties of distribution and varieties of size available. So you can choose into, and the key difference, because somebody might come and say, why I choose Cloudera, why I choose Hortonworks. And so the thing is that when you are using these distributions, if you are using version, if you are making the base based on particular version, based on MapReduce 1.2, HDFS 1.2, all that thing, the runtime is exactly the same. There is no difference because they are cooked from same source. The only difference is they really provide the management capability, monitoring capability. What monitoring engine? Because if you think about Hortonworks, it uses Ambari. They build Ambari, which is based on Ganglia. And Ganglia is a cluster monitoring tool which is created by Berkeley. So Ganglia, if you have a multi-node distributed cluster, you can install Ganglia, and Ganglia, you can use Ganglia to monitor. What Hortonworks did, they use Ganglia, they put another layer of it, and it's called Ambari, and that Ambari is actually helping you to manage and monitor the cluster. If you, versus Cloudera, they build their own. They added their own monitoring capabilities, so that's why they say it's a very proprietary. They bunch the cluster together in a way that if you are coming from normal Hadoop, you might not be able to understand even what was going on there, because they hacked everything differently because they don't want you to know anything. They just want you to use their consulting services, but they made everything dumbed down so that anybody can use it. So that's one way to look into. Okay, so that's where the key differences are. So I think by that, I'm going to conclude our session. Thank you so much for hanging till end. You guys are the great survivors, who survived all day. Listen to me. And once again, if you would like to talk with us, you want to learn what we have done past, learn from our experience, feel free to fill the leaflet. If you want us to contact you back, provide your information, provide the timeline, we would love to call you and just see if there is something we can do. We are building the product. We are still quite a long way to go, but if you would like to partner with us in future, we will have your information and review that, hey, this is what we are doing, would you wanna? So that's all. And at the last, if you haven't got this amazing t-shirt, feel free to get the t-shirt, and so thank you so much once again. Go ahead. Thank you.